today we are looking at an article on the 10 worst castings in superhero movies. This is coming from Collider.com. And just a few days ago, I actually watched a little reel on Instagram of Christopher Reeves from over 30 years ago, before his accident, talking about what's wrong with Hollywood. And it's 30 years ago, and he's talking about the way that at the time, studios were being run by businessmen.
In the old days, the studio system, it was run by people who actually liked movies. What we have now is we've got the studios are run by guys with business degrees who are really only doing pre-selling territories. You get a really interesting, original piece of modern literature like Bonfire of the Vanities, which they cast by pre-selling to an imagined audience. Well, Bruce Willis brings in this audience, Tom Hanks brings in this audience, Morgan Freeman brings in this audience, and they don't care anymore whether they're serving the author's intentions. And I think that really does a disservice to the audience, who really doesn't care so much about stars. They want to see a story well told for their $7.
He's talking about prestige books, but what he says applies to everything, and how the people that so often are in charge of getting these comic book movies made, they don't love the material, they don't understand the material, and they're just thinking as businessmen and marketers. And this person currently is hot, therefore we want to cast him in our movies. And I think so much of these bad castings kind of a lot of times probably plays into a lot of that, just really misreading the room with the way that it plays out. So I'm gonna say with each of these, whether I agree with them, whether I think it was miscast. I think a lot of times where these get tricky is they're saying this person was miscast, but the issue isn't even the casting. The issue is the writing. The writer-director, the characterization, the version they were going for, they cast the person to pull that off. They just came up with a bad idea for the character. Let's dive into this. Coming in at number 10 on their list, the infamous Ezra Miller. And I think right off the bat, simply hindsight 2020, based on just simply, is this a human that you can put the weight of a franchise on? No. I don't know. I have no inside information on Ezra Miller, but what I do know is that Ezra's spiraled out of control at some point in time, leading to scandal after scandal after scandal after scandal. So just right there, this was a miscast. That they found someone that had talent at some moment in time. They went, I see something there. But part of being a movie star and carrying a franchise is having the stability to handle the pressure. And just on that level, before we even get into the performance and anything like that, clearly Ezra Miller was not up to the task on a dramatic level. But then from there, is Miller a good Barry Allen? And this is a scenario, unfortunately, you have a TV show that was running parallel to Ezra Miller's casting, to where you have someone, Grant, that was very popular on a TV show. The TV show went off the rails, but Grant, people always liked Grant in the role. And they went for such a quirky, idiosyncratic version with that. It's hard to see it as like the definitive good performance or anything like that. It's just so weird, so awkward. I'm a big fan of the Flash movie, and of course I love Zack Snyder's Justice League, so I'm much more positive on Miller in the role than most people. At the end of the day, I think you got to say, yeah, I mean, this was a really big miscast, that they did something that didn't connect with people, and they cast someone that was incredibly unstable. Number 9, Jessica Alba as Sue Storm. Jessica Alba was a bit of, one of the flavors of the time, had a big hit TV show, or had a TV show. Everyone was talking about her. So she ends up being cast in the role. I'll of course be rewatching it in the near future. I haven't seen the movie, and I guess since right before Endgame came out was the last time I would have watched it. So it's been about 5.5 years. 6 years, really, I guess. And like, I never thought that she was terrible, but it always was an odd casting. Like when you're having to take someone in that's known for their beauty and their specific look and casting them as someone that's also gorgeous with a very different look. And so you're radically changing hair color, contacts, everything like that. You know, this probably isn't great casting. Worst of all time, like of the problems with that movie, and there's many problems. She was never to me the biggest issue, but she wasn't great casting either. It's not that like you can just look at her career over the last 20 years and, you know, she was a little bit of just the flash of the moment and not someone that had that lasting star power. So I didn't think worst of all time. I could come up with worst casting, but not great either. All right, here's one it's tough for me to comment on. Samuel L. Jackson as as the octopus in The Spirit. I've never read The Spirit. I have not seen The Spirit, so I can't really comment. Samuel L. Jackson, like, I think he's very versatile. Sometimes he does get into the groove of just being cool Samuel L. Jackson, but he can actually act. I can't comment on what he did in this movie because I haven't seen it. I have a hard time thinking he couldn't perform something because I think he's really talented, but also don't know who the octopus is in the comments. Couple comments on Jessica Alba. Daniel Skinner points out something. I guess this is one that kind of missed on this one, but do Jessica Alba and Chris Evans even look like siblings? Very good point. But you could also say, does Chris Evans look like Jessica Alba? I think part of this one right here is that Chris Evans, first off, obviously is on the Mount Rushmore of comic book castings as a great Captain America, and has had the lasting star power in a way that she hasn't, and so you kind of default to giving him a little bit more credit. But you could also say like he doesn't look like her. But I think you just have to say like Chris Evans is a better Johnny Storm. Like in particular, when he was cast, the reason I was nervous about him being cast as Captain America is because he's actually good as a Johnny Storm, as just like the frat guy, the obnoxious guy that's hot and hitting on girls. That's what he did great for a decade, and that's so not Steve Rogers. Steve Rogers, the wholesome man out of time. And he played the stereotypical Zero's jock douchebag. So, did I say it like an accent? Jock douchebag so well. So I think that's probably a good fair point on that one. That the sibling aspect doesn't really work. Topher Grace as Venom, and I think this is an obvious contender for worst comic book movie casting of all time. I like Topher Grace, but I just don't think there's any reason that you would cast Topher Grace as Eddie Brock. You just read the comics, and Eddie Brock is like, in many versions, like he's like a bodybuilder, like he's a big dude. And even in the current movies we're doing with Tom Hardy, like his version isn't portrayed as like just like this big hulking guy, but inherently Tom Hardy, who's not a big guy, which is funny because he was so good at his Bane and like is able to sell himself as Bane, though he's not actually that big of a human. He's under 6 feet tall. It was like crazy, kids going crazy in the hallways. Not a huge guy, but to that point, he gives off this masculine energy. He has like just an imposing nature to him without needing actual size. Topher Grace is goofy. And so it never really worked. It never made sense as an Eddie Brock. And perhaps some of what they were going for is to have, Peter Parker, Toby's a little goofy. Let's have another goofy guy. But that's not who Eddie Brock is. Like Eddie Brock is supposed to be this different personality, not another like an evil goofy photographer. No, that's not who he is. So absolutely, I like Topher Grace this was always a bad casting, a bad use of Venom. And I don't know how much of that is what Sam Raimi said all along, that he never understood the character, never liked the character. And you see that. Topher, Spider-Man 3 should be on there, and he made it on there. Oh, here's another obvious one. Seth Rogen is the Green Hornet. And so Green Hornet, essentially mostly forgotten superhero. If you don't know, they actually had a 1960s Green Hornet TV show that was kind of parallel to the 1966 Batman with Adam West. They even had a crossover episode. And his sidekick was played by Bruce Lee. That was Bruce Lee's door into Hollywood. And it didn't fully work out, and he left, and he was frustrated and all that. But Bruce Lee was on the Green Hornet show. So they decide that they're going to do this modern version, and it's like one of these projects where the reason we don't talk about it, they never found the thing they were going for. They kind of wanted to do the comedy spin on it. They kind of wanted it to be serious. It doesn't lean into parody enough. It's not serious enough. It's the wrong mix. And all of that goes to Seth Rogen as the Green Hornet, that he's the funny man. He's not the action hero. And they tried to have Z do it, and he lost some weight for it. It didn't work. It was the wrong idea. He was the wrong person. So this is another one that it's not as interesting as Venom, because Green Hornet is not nearly as famous or well known as Venom. So it's not as interesting of one, but it also is very bad casting with just a wrong mindset. Here's a tricky one. One of the most infamous ones that people throw out there all the time, Jared Leto as the Joker. I don't know if Jared Leto was miscast or if the characterization was just wrong. Because most of the things in it that really bug me, Jared Leto wasn't the one let's give him a grill and let's tattoo damaged on his forehead, or whatever it is his tattoos are. All of that is very David Ayer. David Ayer, I don't know, was it from he's from East LA or something like that? He comes from a very specific cultural context. And if you watch a lot of his movies, that's where they take place, and that's the flavor of them. So when he makes a Joker, the Joker has that flavor to it. And that's one of the things that is the worst about the characterization. But is it Jared Leto? Do I think his performance is I don't think so. It's as a whole, it's not a good version of the Joker, and some of it's limited to a movie that's this Frankenstein thing that we haven't even seen the real version of it. But maybe Jared Leto was miscast. I don't think we have enough evidence to know. My biggest issues with it are the stuff that Jared didn't actually do. All the weird stories about him sending used condoms to coworkers or whatever because he was the Joker. I don't know what is true. If that's true, that's just extraordinarily unprofessional, and that's not what method acting is meant to be. But yeah, I don't immediately point the finger just at Jared Leto. He's the one that a lot of people like to pick on. When he was cast, he had just won an Oscar. People always forget that. He's an Oscar-winning actor. He's not a bad actor. He's just a weird guy that rubs a lot of people the wrong way. Leto was a victim of terrible writing. I didn't see enough of Jared Leto to know if he was a bad choice. Exactly. Number 4, David Hasselhoff as Nick Fury. This is one that people forget about. And this is one of the most interesting, in my mind, projects out there. There is a late 90s Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV movie written by David Goyer, writer of Blade, Dark City, the Dark Knight trilogy, Man of Steel, comic book movie royalty. David Goyer wrote a Nick Fury movie that was made in the late 90s, and it stars David Hasselhoff. Once again, I think this is an example where I don't think it, like, I watched it like on YouTube or something like that at some point in time. I don't think he was miscast. And this is one where I feel that people are retroactively judging it. Up until the Ultimates, kind of this reboot version of the Avengers, the Marvel started doing the Ultimates line that was kind of a way to like reboot some of their lines from scratch without totally rebooting everything. They do the Ultimates and they redesign Nick Fury to look like Samuel L. Jackson. And then they cast Samuel L. Jackson, and so then that's such a definitive, the way you perceive of it is that way. Prior to that, Nick Fury looked like David Hasselhoff. Like he looks the part. David Hasselhoff is a tall, athletic-looking guy. I know because I've seen a little bit of Baywatch, and he runs around shirtless on the beach in his little red shorts. He can be convincing as an action star because he was one of the biggest TV action stars of the 80s. It was him as Michael Knight, Knight Rider, and then you had Magnum P.I., Tom Selleck. Like, he can be this guy. But he was cast in a low-budget Nick Fury TV movie. Is the problem David Hasselhoff, or is it that he was in this very hokey, corny thing? I don't think it's David Hasselhoff. Like, I just don't think that's the issue. Like, is it a goofy, bad performance? Probably, because it's a goofy, bad movie that just had none of the resources to do what they were trying to do. But could David Hasselhoff, at that point in time, in a good movie with resources and things like that, have been decent? I think so. I don't think that's one of the worst castings ever. Number 3, Jared Leto as Morbius. I'll just say no here. I think Joker's more complicated. On this one, the problems with Morbius are many, and I don't think Jared Leto is anywhere close to the top of the list. Like, did I believe at the beginning that he was this sickly person? Yes. And did I believe that he was the vampired up version of him? Yeah. I don't think Jared Leto was like, well, the reason that movie didn't work is because, man, Jared Leto was miscast. I don't think so. I just reject this one outright. And that's not to defend the movie Morbius. I guess it is to defend Jared Leto. But I rewatched this movie, 4 months ago, whenever, I guess maybe I just watched it not that long ago. He's not the problem with the movie. Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. This is one of the most infamous ones of, we wanted Heisenberg, not Eisenberg. We wanted Bryan Cranston. And there are all these actors that are very famous, that look good with shaved head, and they can be charismatic and intimidating. So that's Bryan Cranston right there. And then instead they went with Social Network. And the characterization is the Social Network. It's like this tech bro guy that's quirky and awkward. This is another one that's very difficult to, how much do you blame him and how much do you blame the writing? The character's written to be this guy that's like shoving Jolly Ranchers into people's mouths and doing weird chirpy just like, he's written to be quirky and weird, and then they cast someone that is that. So I don't know if I entirely just blame Jesse, because anyone that would have been given that responsibility, we'd all be like, what? No, we wanted Bryan Cranston. And they didn't write Bryan Cranston. They wrote that Mark Zuckerberg, Lex Luthor. And then they cast Mark Zuckerberg to be Lex Luthor. That's what they were going for. So, I don't blame Jesse, but in terms of just characterizations that what nobody wanted, sure, this is one of the worst. Like, this was just ill-conceived. Like, just not a good idea. There's no reason that, I guess you want to make it modern, but cinematically, in the movies, all we had was the Gene Hackman version, because Kevin Spacey is just Gene Hackman 2.0, which is goofy real estate scheme. It would have been perfectly fine to do just a classic, or classic in the modern sense, the Man of Steel version that goes back to the run from the 1980s Man of Steel, where they turned Lex Luthor into the businessman that, Rosenbaum played that version, and all the shows have done that version. You could have just done that with Bryan Cranston. Everyone would have been happy. And there's several other actors that could have done that too. Even like Mark Strong, who you later cast in Shazam. You could have done it with him too. But instead, you did Tech Bro, and nobody wants that. Final one on here, Shaquille O'Neal as Steel, and I think this is an easy, yes, you're correct. This is what we talked about before at the beginning of this. Like, how do you get some of these bad castings? It's because there's businessmen trying to, manipulate what's hot at the moment, and they want Shaquille O'Neal is hot. This guy is megastar basketball player. Let's throw him in a movie, and the guy can't act. So you took the Superman property that could have been a big deal and made it totally forgettable because now it's just remembered as this terrible Shaq vehicle. But yeah, I mean, this absolutely belongs on the list. You tried to run your tentpole film on a guy that can't act. He had a video game called Shaq Fu. He had rap albums. Like, the Shaq craze of the late 90s was wild. How much stuff they gave him. And this is just one of the ultimate examples of that. So then some of the ones, Shaq better be on the list. He made it on the list. In the comments, you guys sent in some of your picks on here. Kind of says it, but Clooney as Batman is both awesome and awful. I'll say this. I don't think that Clooney is inherently a bad pick. He's a fantastic pick for Bruce Wayne. And you can watch From Dusk Till Dawn, that came out right before Batman and Robin, and see he can play a convincing, intimidating character. I don't think that he's inherently a bad pick for Batman, but he was in a movie that it was just a terrible version of the character. Unpopular opinion, Michael Keaton wasn't a good fit for Batman. Without the argument for it, it's tough for me to respond to it, but that goes back to whenever he was first announced, people immediately were like, this guy's too short to play Batman, which is pretty fair and true. He fit the movie that he was in, which is Michael Keaton played what Tim Burton does well, these eccentric loner weirdos. He played a really good eccentric loner weirdo Batman. Jamie Foxx as Electro is definitely a miscast for his Amazing Spider-Man 2 characterization. Yeah, I mean, that movie in a lot of ways plays it pretty serious, but then you have a character that is supposed to be the dorkiest, nerdiest guy in all of New York City. And they cast Jamie Foxx to play him. Jamie Foxx is many things. Nerdy and awkward do not apply. It's like one of the guys is like one of the coolest guys of the last 30 years that just oozes cool and charisma. Even I watched a clip of him talking about when he first cast in Django, and he showed up to set and Tarantino had to pull him aside to be like, hey man, I knew this was going to happen. Dude, you're a slave. You can't be so cool. You got to dial it back a little bit right now. Like Jamie Foxx as nerdy guy, it doesn't work. So what do you have to do? You have to just crank up stereotypes. Broken glasses, he's got a wacky hair. And you don't believe any of it. Everybody in Schumacher's Batman movies, yeah, but how much of that is they were miscast, and how much of that is that the characterization itself? Jennifer Garner for Elektra, I like Jennifer Garner too much, and I like her beating people up. So I'm not gonna go after her. I can't set my targets on her. Taylor Kitsch as Gambit in Origins. I prefer Channing Tatum and DP as the Cajun hero. Taylor Kitsch is a Cajun guy with a accent. It just wasn't believable. He just couldn't pull it off. He didn't it was like they cast the guy that he was like a rising star that they tried to make him the guy. So right after this, he was John Carter. He was in Battleship, and it didn't take. But it was one of those ones where they were trying to cast the guy, and it just didn't fit. It didn't make any sense. Some casting choices for comedy characters were good on paper, but were very poorly executed. I think Tommy Lee Jones falls into that category. I think this is an example of what we talked about just a couple comments ago of how much of it is he was cast poorly and how much of it he was in just a movie that didn't allow it to work. Like, you talk about someone that can be cranky, charismatic, serious, play a lawyer. Like, Tommy Lee Jones can do all of those things. He could be a great Two-Face. And then they put him in a live-action cartoon. And so his characterization is like just Two-Face, much like the Riddler in that movie. They're just Joker 2.0. They're just swinging their arms around loud and crazy, wild and crazy. It's not a good characterization. But that's not because he couldn't play it. It's because he's in a live-action cartoon. Got Nick Cage as Ghost Rider. For me, I don't think... There's very few cases where I think that you can do Nick Cage as an iconic comic book character and it would work. Like, he worked really well in Kick-Ass because it's not an established character and it was like a Nick Cage performance. But as soon as you just have Nick Cage doing Nick Cage and you just see Nick Cage, like, it just overshadows the person that he's playing. You don't see Blaze, you don't see Ghost Rider, you see Nick Cage because he has such a strong persona, such a distinct way that he talks with the cadence and everything like that. So that's probably a good one. Affleck is Daredevil. Well, see, now that's time-wise. He wasn't Affleck then. He was Armageddon guy then. I normally am a bit of a defender of... I would say there's more... I think he's a better Batman. I think with Daredevil, he's more agile than a brawler. And Ben Affleck's a little bit too big of a guy. That's why he's a good Batman. That's more of what my issue would be. But like I'm more of a defender of that Daredevil movie compared to most people. Not that it's particularly good, but I'm a defender of it. So I wouldn't call him one of the worst. Halle Berry's Catwoman. I think this is an example of an actress getting stuck in a bad movie. Like, she just won an Oscar, and then she was cast in a terrible movie that's a atrocious version of Catwoman. But I don't think it's that could Halle Berry be a good Selena Kyle? Yeah, but she wasn't in a movie playing Selena Kyle. So was she miscast? Well, who's the person you could have cast in that movie that would have been good? She's not the problem with that movie. Like she's the good thing about that movie. All right, we'll close out on Finn Wolfhard, that's someone different. Finn Jones as Iron Fist wasn't very good either. Yeah, he's not in a movie, so I don't know if he counts for this list, but yeah, that's a great example. Thoughts on Dolph Lundgren as the Punisher? You know, I think I watched that movie more than most people. I watched it last month. You know, he's not the problem with the movie. And I don't think the movie's particularly that flawed. It's not that memorable. It's not that flawed either. But yeah, you know, he's physically convincing as a Punisher, of course, because he's a big, imposing guy. He can do the fights because he's an actual martial artist. We know all of this. He's a good action star. I think you have the problem of, you know, even the character himself, you just have to be convincing it being intense. And he is. So, he's not great, but I don't think he's terrible either. Most of these clips are pulled from my Patreon live streams. I do about 6 live streams every single month. For $2 per month, $20 per year, you can get access to all the exclusive videos and live streams. For $5 per month, you get your name on my end card. At the top tier, you get a 30-minute video chat with me each month. The link down below in the description has more information.